Hey everybody, welcome all of you to Connected Learning TV and today's chat and discussion about getting library and IT admins on board with leveraging social media. I'm Jack Martin, I'm president of YALSA, aka the Young Adult Library Services Association, and I'm going to be your Hangout moderator today. So for those of you who are watching on live stream or the recording of this webinar, today's conversation is actually part of Connected Learning's TV's shift to a monthly format for deeper looks at connected learning themes, communities, and topics. The first month of this new format has been focusing on teens and the future of libraries, and YALSA is super excited to be part of this. So before we get started, just a few quick details before we dive in. So for those who are participating via live stream today, we encourage you to use the chat there to introduce yourselves, connect with each other, and pose questions for those here in the Google Plus Hangout, but also for those of you, for everybody who are also on the chat. And speaking of Google Plus, there's actually a fast-growing connected learning community with over 1,300 members, and we would love for all of y'all to be part of the conversations happening there. There's a separate section within that community just for conversations about teens and the future of libraries, and a link to the Google Plus community should be included in the live stream chat, so check that there. The URL for our public group notes Google Doc for today should also be included in the live stream chat. We really appreciate your energy in capturing highlights and sharing resources related to today's conversation. That Google Doc will remain open to the public forever and ever, or a long time, so we can continue to add to it even after today. So before we jump in and ask Dana, who I'm really thrilled to be in the chat with today. We were both at a panel in your public library a few years ago, so it's great to have you back. But before we get into that, I wanted to give everyone here in the Hangout a chance to introduce themselves. So if we could actually start with Gina, and we can work our way right.
Okay, my name is Gina Millsap. I'm the CEO of the Shawnee County Public Library. My street cred, though, to talk about teen services and young adults is I am a former young adult librarian. Actually, that's what I spent the first 4 years of my career working with. I still work an afternoon every few weeks in the Edge, which is one of our teen service areas. And I also did IT part of my career, so I'm kind of schizophrenic about this conversation.
Great. John.
Hello, everybody. My name is John Patton. I'm the Director of Technology for a 8,000 student K-8 school district, Sylvan Union School District in Modesto, California. Started as a teacher and worked myself up into administration and find myself helping teachers with technology now.
Awesome. Paula? Paula, are you there?
Hi, I'm Paula. Sorry. I am currently an administrator with the Public Library of Cincinnati, Hamilton County. I am a past YALSA president, and I started my career in youth services, did teen services for several years, wrote a book, a couple articles, and now I'm in administration, but still have a lot of interest in serving teens.
Thank you everyone. You are all beautiful and fabulous. So we are also happy to have Dana Boyd here with us in the Hangout today. For those of you who don't know, Dana is a senior researcher at Microsoft Research, a research assistant professor in media culture and communication at New York University, a visiting researcher at Harvard Law School, a fellow at Harvard's Berkman Center, and an adjunct associate professor at the University of New South Wales. She researches social media, youth practices, and tensions between technology and society. You may also know her for her very stylish fuzzy hats and as Zephoria on Twitter. So Dana's going to kick things off for us, but I wanted just to sort of think. So Dana, tell us what are your thoughts on why youth using social media in school and public libraries is such a great thing?
No problem. Thank you all for joining us today. I have to start by saying that I absolutely heart librarians, and I depend on librarians to be at the forefront of really helping make certain that young people are actually really engaging with information in a critical way. I guess the thing to realize is that I've been doing a lot of ethnographic work, primarily with American teenagers for the better part of the last decade. And most of what I've been doing is with the rise of social media. And a lot of people have looked at social media, early on it was the questions of Xanga and LiveJournal, and then we fed into MySpace, then we fed into Facebook. Facebook is now starting to fade, and we're seeing an amazing splintering. Of course, Tumblr is the top of everybody's conversation today, but we've got Tumblr and Instagram, Twitter, Kik, a whole variety of different things that are sort of flowing out there. And we see these technologies, and young people are really embracing them, but there's a lot of confusion about what's going on and whether or not they have meaningful learning potential. And I think that from my point of view, it's really important to realize that young people are engaging with these social media as a way of participating in a new form of public life. They're trying to get access to a public world that they, for many reasons, have actually been removed from. So if you think historically about the ability to go out into publics and interact with people and learn from people around you, that becomes more and more challenging. Young people their lives are very, very scripted. They go from activity to activity in very structured environments. And their relationship with institutions is very much formalized. Whether we're talking about a school institution or, in many cases, a library, where they're allowed to go for a very scripted period of time for very specific activities. And what's happened is that social media has emerged in the landscape as an opportunity to just have access to people and information in the interstitial moments. The ability to sort of reach out and just be able to hang out. And a lot of what you see is the dominant paradigm of why young people turn to social media is that they're just hanging out. They're just goofing around with their friends. They're trying to find a way to socialize. Now, that said, it's important to realize that socialization is not, separable really from learning. A lot of how we learn about how the world works is really by socializing and interacting with other people. And so there's a learning component to that socialization. But of course, the other thing that social media becomes valuable for, and the thing that we usually describe as learning, is when young people are getting access to different kinds of information. Now, that information, of course, splinters across many different directions. You have young people who are getting access to information or content purely for entertainment, right? The idea of seeing an animated GIF and having fun with it and just being playful. Or you see young people trying to get access to information that we would think about as sort of more formalistic or more education appropriate, whether it is trying to understand everything from sexual health related issues to something as simple as like how does a motor work, right? You have a wide range of this. So this is where you see these technologies be really conflated, because what happens is that these same tools are being used for a wide variety of different practices, from everyday sociality to different kinds of learning to, in many ways, more deeply problematic activities, just as we would see any other public space be there. And this is where we start to see panic, and we get utopian and dystopian rhetorics really dominate the conversation. And so you start to see adults, and including librarians and educators, sort of try to deal with this, often by moving into a restriction mode. The idea is that if they just restrict access, young people's access, this is a way of protecting them. And the assumption is that we can protect young people from the world by making certain that they don't have these kinds of interactions that could be potentially problematic. And in many ways, I think that this puts librarians in particular in a very funny position, because in previous generations, it was possible to restrict access to certain kinds of content, either by simply not carrying the content or putting it into specific, behind specific layers that required getting access being really modified. These days, when you're dealing with a technologically mediated environment, you get into these other sets of challenges where the act of censoring or restricting content doesn't mean that young people can't route around it. And in fact, what happens is that they often do route around it. They often go and find, innovative ways to get proxies so that they can get access to things that have been, verboten for any number of reasons. And of course, the moment you say that something is not appropriate for them, it's all the sort of more curious of like figuring out exactly what that content is and where it should be found. They can use different devices. They go outside of the library. All of this is really happening. Well, really what it comes down to, and I think the big challenge for our conversation today, has to do with, it's not just about restricting or not restricting, but it has to do with questioning the role of the librarian in helping young people navigate a lot of this material. And I think a lot of it for me comes down to these issues of trust and respect and intergenerational social dynamics. And when you go into a mode of just restriction, you don't end up building out the ways of having trust and respect, or really being able to create a really meaningful educational opportunity. And so it just becomes these barriers. And we keep seeing that with a lot of young people's interactions with adults, is that a lot of it has become much more formalistic and much more fraught, shall we say. Now, I say that with another important caveat in all of this. Young people are not digital natives. They do not have some magical falls from the sky skills where they can just use technology and voila, everything is great. In many ways, they don't know what they're doing any better than we do. Now, they're much more willing to experiment. They have different kinds of schedules and times. And, frankly, they're not thinking about breaking the technology. So they're exploring, but they don't necessarily have the critical or technical literacies to even navigate what's in front of them. They don't know how to ask the hard questions of what they see. They don't even necessarily know how to interpret what's going on. And I'm not saying this is like there's a magical moment when a child turns 13 or 18 and suddenly becomes aware, but rather that it's a learning process. And that learning process is a lifelong learning process. I still spend time with my mother, and she comes back with something she's found on the internet, and she asks these questions as though it's real, and I'm like, Mom, what were you thinking? Right? So it's not even a matter of just age. It's a process of how you learn and how you learn to think critically. And here's actually where I think that librarians can be hugely valuable, because the thing that a librarian knows how to do better than anyone else is to ask the hard questions, to ask critical questions of anybody who's in their environment about what kind of information are they accessing? How do they make sense of it? How do they know that it's credible? What does that look like? And this is not about telling young people, but really inviting them to think through the process. And so when we create these barriers, when we restrict young people from accessing social media, we lose the opportunity to help them navigate this process by asking really hard questions. And I think that's where I'll sort of give it back to you, Jack, because I think this is where, for me, the heart of it is that it's not just about whether social media is good or bad, but it's about how do we help young people navigate all of the media that's in front of them in a way that they can be really informed and engaged.
Thanks, Dana. That was actually a really great sense of the landscape of this issue that we're combating. I want to take what you said, but I want to kick it up a little bit because today's conversation is really about. I know the importance of social media for teens, in libraries, and so do library workers all over the country. But I guess what we're focusing on here is what are some take homes that we can give that we can send out to our watchers and our tweeters, some best practice on how can we help our admins and library administrators understand the importance of this. So the question that I actually want to throw to the panel is. So, and I think Dana, you hinted at this, but how do we combat the stigma that social media sites don't hold educational or learning value for youth?
I guess I'll say from my end that it's a really tricky thing, because the same thing is held up more generally about everyday interactions, right? Which is that we've gotten to a point within our society writ large where we assume that the only learning thing are that which can be formalized into No Child Left Behind or other such formalistic metrics, and that if it's not really proper for reading or writing or arithmetic, then that there's no point. And I think that that's where social media can't just be sort of thought of as a separate thing, but thought of as a broader continuum about all of the variety of learning that happens all around us, and to realize that learning doesn't get necessarily bottled into categories that we can separate. So when I see social media, it's not just the material or the content, but the opportunities for interaction, the opportunities to see the world writ large, and to realize that there is learning in sociality, that there is learning in understanding how to interact with media, and that is really taking place for a lot of young people through social media. And that it's this one vehicle in which they're really getting access to learning opportunities that in many ways have become much more scripted in other parts of their lives.
Gina or John or Paula, do you guys have any more?
I'll take it. In our school district, we've got a population of students who have parents that really haven't gone through this whole digital revolution. Sure, they're on Facebook and they share information on that, but their idea of the use of technology and social media for educational purposes is really not existent. What they see in terms of their children probably is, you know, chatting back and forth while they're playing Minecraft or they're on the Xbox, and their idea of technology is still a little narrow in terms of using it for educational purposes. I think, and we don't like to add more work to what we have to do in schools, but the idea that bringing this adult parent population along for the ride in terms of educating them on the benefits of social media with students in terms of making connections and sharing information and asking questions and receiving feedback is very important. In our school district, you know, we start with baby steps with staff because we still have many staff that are fairly unfamiliar, again, other than maybe say the Facebook. You know, looking at tools like Moodle or Schoology or Edmodo that begin to give them a framework that they can work within, almost like a walled garden. So it's a little bit secure until they get some confidence and get some place to stand solid, so that they can then begin looking at jumping into some ed chats on Twitter and those kinds of things. So I think parents is another thing that we often forget in terms of the student population growing up right now, and they're kind of you know, that will change as we progress over the years, and the technology isn't so new as these children grow up and be adults. But right now I think we have a population of adults that are very unfamiliar with how schools use social media to help students learn.
This is Paula. So I think that John has brought up a really good point about the different generational interactions, and I agree with the parent idea, but I also would say, in my experience, particularly with younger teenagers, that I think that in this transition time, there is an opportunity to engage grandparents and extended family members in a comfortable way to introduce social media to the family overall. And I say that because sometimes grandparents are a little bit more inclined, in my experience, to work with their grandkids on something that's new or unusual, both from a learning perspective and because they're tolerant, because it's fun, because the kid suddenly really is having a great time. So, you know, when we first started some things in libraries that were unusual, like gaming and other things, we would have grandparents involved. You know, a teenager who was a little bit younger would engage with their grandparents with this unusual technology. And I think that this is something that libraries should really think about, how they can engage not just parents, but other people that are so involved in kids' lives. Right now we have so many young people that I know who their parents are not their primary caregiver. Their parent isn't the primary person that they spend a Saturday with. It's often their grandparent. And I think this is a missed opportunity for libraries in terms of programming and training, and it also offers teenagers this really unique chance to help someone else understand the technology, which forces them, I think, to really think through things that, as Dana said, they don't think about. They're just using it. But when they are explaining it to somebody else, if you've ever seen a 12-year-old explain Facebook to their grandparent, I mean, it's a fascinating thing to watch. And I think that that is something we should not forget. It's not just parents as an opportunity for education, but maybe some other people that kids can teach, and in that process teach themselves.
I love this idea of, especially the intergenerational, the different generations working together on social media. I also like John's example too. Are there other just like clear like best practices or things that anybody on this panel has used in order to rally library admins and IT people to support social media use in the library?
This is Gina. A number of years ago, we decided to approach what we call our digital bench, managing it as we would any physical facility, and so we elected to not place any restrictions on any type of access. And it's definitely easier in a public library environment, and I want to say that because we don't operate in loco parentis. So I think that some of the perhaps the concerns or challenges that school libraries face, typically we don't. The other thing is, in some ways the ship has sailed. Whether we choose to give access to kids or not, they will get access. If they have a smartphone, if they have a tablet, if they have any other access to internet, they're already utilizing social media in some way, shape, or form. And so then from a public library perspective, how do we manage that and help kids be information literate and be smart about it? And so what we've elected to do is really incorporate social media into the way we program, into the way we present information through the digital branch. And early on, like a lot of libraries did, for instance, we had a Second Life project. Would anybody remember Second Life? So that we were trying to reach where they already were and where they had an interest in going, but at the same time recognizing that if we weren't providing that, we weren't really going to be relevant to them.
So when we think about, sorry, is somebody else going to talk?
Oh, this is Paula. I just wanted to offer a very straightforward example of what Gina's talking about, of how kids will develop their own use of social media with or without adults. It's a little bit dated, but I still think it's relevant. Years ago, I had a teen advisory board, and in the traditional way of like trying to organize things and tell them what was going on, I said, hey, we should maybe start a Facebook page. And of course, every kid in the room looked at me and said, Paul, we've had a Facebook page for months. Where have you been? They had organically made one because they wanted one. It never occurred to them not to make it, and they'd been talking to each other all this time, and I was like, oh. So I couldn't agree more about the fact that it's virtually impossible to believe that you could keep kids from organically doing what they want to do one way or the other.
Because the flip side of that, though, is that you want to actually really encourage some of that organicness. And I think this is actually where we see the awkwardness about when educators and librarians are so enthusiastic, where they were like, everybody should jump into these technologies, and young people are like, not my thing yet, like not really what I'm interested in, is you want to really find that balance. And I think nowhere to me is this also clearer than when it comes to how you interact in these environments with young people. So for example, let's just take Facebook, since that's been so dominant for the last few years. It's generally not a healthy thing for adults to come in and try to befriend kids on Facebook, because it creates all these weird power dynamics and makes everybody awkward. But the flip side of that is that we've moved into a mode where we say we should never friend kids, so as a result we should never accept friend requests from kids. When in fact, when a young person is inviting you, whether you're the grandparent or whether you're the librarian, into their world, that is an amazing opportunity. It's an amazing opportunity to be invited in, to see what's going on, and to be able to ask those hard questions. And so there's these delicate balances in a lot of these environments about how to both keep them organic and to keep the lines open so that people can feel like they're part of it when they want to be.
Thank you. I actually want to just, in our chat window, we have a question from the live stream. So in terms of thinking about these points of resistance, and actually I do want to come back to what Dana was saying, because I think a lot about youth and adults being together online in the same space. And I think that there are lots of pros and cons for that. But what are the primary, and maybe this is a question for Paula or for Gina or for John, what are the primary points of resistance that library admins raise for bringing in gaming and social media? Is it around safety concerns? Is it around privacy?
This is Paula. I'll just bring one up that I think in the last 2 years has become more and more of an issue, and it has to do with maybe something somebody said earlier about resources, and you should only do things that are learning oriented and increase literacy. And that is, simply a straightforward, why are you using increasingly scarce resources to game on a Saturday afternoon? I can't stress enough how these other things are really important, but because budgets have been shrinking so much, as administrators, every single resource, be that staff time or anything you're purchasing at all, is really examined. So I think a new point of resistance can simply be funds and resources dedicated to things that sometimes people view as outside what a library does.
I think you bring up a really important point about the question of what, about what are educational activities in libraries. I actually know of the head of one library system who actually said in our public libraries. So so kids could have an opportunity to do homework instead. And what happens is, kids just leave. They don't come back. So I think you're totally right. There's a really big question about what is considered educational. And I think that also kind of loops back to what Dana was saying in the beginning about what kinds of learning are, and what you were saying, what are kids actually learning when they're in these online spaces?
Yeah.
I'll chime in now. From a school's standpoint, in terms of the resistance to opening social media and gaming up, it stems from at least an unfamiliarity with the tools and the belief that, and I know in a lot of schools, if their networks are tighter than a drum, it's because not so much they're concerned about student safety or privacy, but they're concerned about getting flack from, say, an administrator or an assistant principal, for example, that is afraid that by giving students access to this, they're going to increase the number of discipline referrals they have to deal with and discipline issues. And I know from my experience that is not the case. Many times, students will learn valuable skills through gaming. And I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but the idea that, games are kind of just the entryway into the whole idea of using these tools for learning, because they may be brought on through the game initially, but ultimately what happens is they want to modify the game. They want to change something. And the only way they're going to learn about how to do that is by exploring their social media tools to find those folks that have the same ideas and same interests, and begin building their knowledge on their own. And that's kind of that organic thing, I think, that we were saying earlier.
I think, John, you just started this. You just started to answer my second question for the group. But in terms of thinking about, of just sort of bringing, because that's a great story. Those are great, positive ways and stories. But are there other, for the rest of the panel, do you all have other ways to address the inevitable internet safety concerns of both parents and library IT admins? Like I said, I think these best practice stories are. Sorry about that. Basically my question was, so what are the best ways to address the inevitable internet safety concerns of parents and library IT admins? I don't know if you caught it, but I think John that was a great kind of best case scenario. But does anybody else on the panel, do you have other best stories or best practices, something that we could share with the people who are watching and tweeting us?
This is
a silver bullet, perhaps?
I think that, this is Gina again. I think it's really important not to be forced into a defensive posture, which means that you look at social media as part of what is available, on the web, and you talk about how does this fit into our overall library service plan in terms of how we provide service and access to all of our customers, regardless of their age. And then how do we customize that for the unique needs, say, of teens? So that is already in place. There's a plan in place that says, this is how we're utilizing social media, and this is how we're promoting it, and this is how we're encouraging kids to interact, at least with the library, with social media, and with each other. So that's one approach.
I love that approach.
This is Dana. I think it's really important to tease out the moments when we're trying to address the actual safety concerns and the safety fears. And those two things are actually quite different. And what I mean by this is that there are a lot of fears about how technology will be used in ways that are often mythological. There's a lot of belief that kids will be abducted from their use of online media. Abduction and rape come up a lot when in fact, when we start to look at the data on this, the picture of what's actually happening is so disconnected from the anxieties and fears that people have versus the concerns that parents and community members have that are actually much more grounded in the experiences that they've had with their kids. So their child's actual interpersonal conflict issues, right, which may lead to issues of bullying or other forms of meanness and cruelty. And those are actually much more practical and require tactical responses. And so this is one of the challenges, I think, for librarians and for educators writ large, is how to actually assess when those fears and anxieties are coming from mediated landscapes and that there's no way to assuage them through anything that resembles data or concrete action, versus the kinds of things that are like, how do we actually work to address this child's vulnerabilities, this child's needs? And this is actually where I think that there's also an accounting for where parents come into this. Because, as Paula has mentioned, there's a variety of different family members who are really relevant to the story. But a lot of parents come in and very much hold librarians and educators to unrealistic expectations about making certain the child is protected from every form of negativity that might ever occur in their lives. And I think this is where, for better or worse, other actors in kids' lives, whether we're talking librarians or educators, end up a good thing, but I'm saying that this is one of the stark realities, is that a lot of this isn't really about dealing with the technology per se, but dealing with a culture of fear and anxiety.
This is Paula, and I think that that's an excellent point, and I think one way to try and bridge the gap between reality and knowledge and what could happen and what would happen and all of the things that people who don't know really about any subject experience because you just don't know, is possibly to do something at your library that utilizes a social media element that has broad base among different generations, that's accessible and a little less scary. So an example is lots of libraries for years have done things like photography contests. We've done that since we had non-digital cameras, and kids developed them and brought them in, you hung them up on the wall. Well, what about doing this but using Flickr? It's social media. You can have an award event where parents and full families come, and this is a sharing social media tool, but it's very safe and calm, and everybody can see it and realize what it is and look at their kids' work. And I think trying to find a comfort zone in some way and allowing people to opt in and experience it gives them the chance to realize all social media isn't the same, and that they can relate to some social media and they can really feel the positive thing without necessarily knowing they just use social media to be a positive influence in their kids' life. So I think librarians can, again, just kind of ease folks into it and find something that people are a little bit more comfortable with as the first element, and that can be all the difference in terms of their willingness to try something else with their kids.
Here's
I think
another.
that.
I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. I was actually going to throw it back to you, Gina, anyway, so go for it.
This is something, and again, this isn't a public library environment. I mean, the reality of the situation I see every day, and I'm down on the floor, and as I said, I still work in the edge, every one afternoon every 3 weeks, and I do that on purpose. First of all, because I have a very soft spot in my heart for that age, but also because it helps me understand what's happening on the ground. And the reality is, at least in the public library environment I'm in, most parents have no clue what their kids are doing online. No clue at all. And so, and I'm not saying they're not concerned about that, but certainly they're not concerned enough to attempt an intervention, at least with what they're doing at the library. And so where we come from is, how do we help kids understand what it is they're actually doing without interfering with them or compromising their privacy, just as we would with any other individual. And so what we do is we have specialists. We have a teen librarian. We have a tween librarian. Those folks are responsible for not just developing the programming and the collections, but getting to know the kids. and really observing them and understanding and talking to them and finding it out what it is that is important to them about being online. And then developing similar communications and similar types of resources online that at least come close to what seems to be important to the kids at any given time. But part of this is just relationships. Right.
So in terms of thinking about the relationships and also thinking about what Dana was talking about earlier about adults and youth being in the same digital space at the same time, do you all think that librarians can ensure that teen library spaces will promote safety and good digital citizenship with enforced user policies and guidelines? Or the flip side, is it better to promote an environment of trust and be more hands-off when it comes to monitoring youth?
From my perspective, I think it's a lot. This is not either an either or, nor is it quite as simplistic. I think a lot of it is understanding where particular youth are at and figuring out what intervention strategies will help them become more informed and more engaged. You know, like, for example, one of the things that I found is a really good tactic for a lot of youth is to ask them questions about why they're doing something, right? Just calling them out and be like, why are you doing this? And when they have to go through the process of explaining it, be like, but why? That doesn't make sense. You start to realize a point of reflection that then gets taken on in a totally different way than saying, don't do this, you're doing something wrong, right? They're such different approaches. And you can do, as a librarian, you know, especially a non-custodial role like that, you can do that. You can actually ask those hard questions in ways where other people actually need to be doing a lot more of the strict monitoring. And you should leverage that unique position when you're not in a custodial role. Leverage the position to be able to ask the critical questions that develop the sensibilities, rather than just trying to regulate the behavior or just trying to walk away from it. I think that those are, you know, they get polarized like that, but I think a lot of it is about being engaged and showing you care and showing that you're attentive to what's going on and that, you know, this may or may not be right. And that's how you will help people walk through those lines.
I know in our school district, we're getting ready to roll out a one-to-one and, you know, technology initiative. And one of the big focuses that we have is, you know, the parent education part. We're constantly hammering on that. And the idea that, you know, these students will have this device that will be with them all the time, that they will take home. And we don't want to get to the point where, you know, the parents are calling us and complaining that their son or daughter is online till 12:30 every night and they don't know what to do because they're afraid to touch the device. They think it's the student's device. And that's a real comment I've heard in the past. So one of the ways that we're addressing that education with our parents is looking at possibly putting a parent app on that device. You know, essentially a marketing tool, an education tool, not just for the kids, but for the parents, so that when they go home with that device, the parents will pick that device up, they will navigate to the parent app, and they will access information about how, you know, their children are learning in schools these days using the tools and so forth, and hopefully fostering a understanding and a curiosity, and what Dana was saying, the ability to ask their child questions about what they're doing with that tool. So I don't know if, you know, we all have websites and stuff, and the public libraries have websites and so forth. I can remember when I was a young kid going to the library and going there for story time. I'm sure public libraries have systems in the classes in the summertime now that mom and son or mom and daughter come in and learn about technology and social tools. But I would think, you know, that's one area that we need to do a better job of in terms of moving this along a little bit quicker.
This is Paula, and I would also say that Gina brought up an excellent point about dedicated staff and experts. So the one thing you can provide is an environment where there are staff members who do have relationships with teens, and teens will talk to them. It doesn't guarantee that every teenager in your library is going to go to that area, or that you could control their choices. But I think an important part is to give the choice, that they participate in that kind of an environment, because public libraries have always been about choices, and we can't force adults to behave like adults in our libraries, and we can't force kids to go to the teen department, but we have an obligation to provide them an environment that is the best possible option, where they know people and can ask questions and have these important relationships. And I think that's where a lot of libraries, they want to do more than that, or they want to do less, but really that is I think a baseline of what we should be doing.
And I think, this is Jean again, I think we always have to distinguish between, okay, the library has a Facebook account, a Twitter account, a Tumblr account. We can certainly model good behaviors, being civil, being, interacting appropriately, however one defines that. But the reality is, we don't control or have no means of controlling what kids choose to do on their own accounts. And so there's this whole other huge usage of social media that's going on that I don't see. I mean, there is no control, so what can we do? I mean, from a public library perspective, the best that we can do is model, and talk to kids and talk to them about what they're doing and build trust so that they feel comfortable sharing what they're doing, so that if something untoward is occurring, at least we can have a conversation about it.
So we've talked a little bit about sort of the second part of that question, but I want to go back to the part about about promoting safety and good digital citizenship in libraries with enforced user policies and guidelines. So I have to share. So in one of Global Kids' schools last week, we were using Mozilla's Popcorn Maker to teach the kids about editing video, and of course, like, the school blocks YouTube, so we couldn't use YouTube. But apparently, one of the students has a trick where they figure out a workaround from the firewall, and so everybody was actually able to use YouTube for the workshop. But I wanted to throw it out to all of you guys in this panel. What do y'all do when that happens? Like when you find a workaround, is it a moment of as a reflection about responsibility? What do you do when that happens?
I know in my district, we have everything pretty much wide open in terms of filtering, other than, say, the SEPA and E-rate requirements for blocking pornography and gambling and so forth. But YouTube, Facebook, Vimeo, all those services are open in our school, and we don't have a huge, long acceptable use policy that students sign. Essentially, it's there's a little bit more technology things added there, but we keep it simple. And students are pretty good at knowing right from wrong, in terms of how they treat others and how they behave and what's expected of them. And students will push boundaries, they'll make mistakes. School's that place to do that, and we'll handle the issues in terms of those mistakes as they come, just like with any other discipline thing. It's not anything special with the use of technology. I don't know, public libraries, I'm expecting, or I don't know, to have an acceptable use policy, because I don't remember signing anything when I signed up for my library card, but maybe I did. But I know in schools we do have acceptable use policies and understood guidelines for how students will use technology and staff will use technology.
We do as well.
As do we, and I think that Gina's point about modeling is really important. So somebody along here mentioned YouTube. I know libraries have YouTube contests where teens make videos about various things about the library. ALA had a big Why I Love My Library video contest a couple of years ago. So I think it is different in public and school libraries. We do have acceptable use policies, but we have standards of library behavior. So it's that issue of technologies, like everything at the public library. We have boundaries, and you have to acknowledge those. But, you know, again, our responsibility is to offer people and teens the choice to use it in a variety of ways, and also lead them to knowing how to do that, which is something that Dana has brought up a couple of times, which is, again, just because it appears that your teens know what they're doing, you know, doesn't mean you just write off the need for instruction or education or assistance. It's probably not entirely as it seems.
I also think you can look at acceptable use approaches as a regulatory force, wait, this is right and this is wrong, or as the beginning of a conversation. And I think that the places where I've seen these implemented well, it becomes the beginning of a conversation. It becomes a negotiation for how we understand the social norms. Basically, how can we all get along, right? How can we make this an environment we all want to be a part of, whether we're talking a school or a library? And so I think that the acceptable use approaches have value, not just as the thing that lays down the law, but as the thing that begins the conversation about what norms and values look like within a community.
And I wonder how much longer, you know, as we talk, I'm thinking about, so how often do we have conversations with teens about, well, when you go to the mall, you should do this, you know, or when you're out and about in the community, this is how you behave. Parents model that behavior, the other adults in their lives model that behavior. And when they're very young children, we talk about being nice and being polite, right, and all those kinds of things. I don't know how much longer we'll be talking about online behavior, you know, just because it's so integrated into everyone's life that you don't even really think about it anymore. We're very much in a transition. And as and I'll just talk about myself because I'm an old person now. I'm a boomer, you know. As I start to exit the workplace and as my colleagues do, I'm just not sure how much longer we'll be talking about this. We'll be talking about something else.
No, that's a really good point. You know, when do our digital lives and our physical lives become so blended? I mean, you're right. You're right. It's pretty close. I wanted to kick it to John. There's a question for you from the live stream. It looks like it may be coming from someone from the schools. But how did you make the case for open in your school district?
In terms of making it open, it has to start with educators that know how to use those resources, know how to use YouTube videos, or guide kids into searching for something on the internet that might result in a YouTube resource, for example, or something else that might be blocked. It comes from teachers using social media to collaborate with other schools in other parts of the world or in space. And some of those examples you can't do without the technology or without the social media, and it just brings that much more student engagement into what they're learning. To be able, it's something real. It's not something they're doing and putting in a box for the teacher to check off or give them a gold star. It's an idea that they're sharing with another human being, another peer in another location on the planet, and then receive feedback from them. And I think for a long time, well, forever since technology came, we haven't had that opportunity in our schools, that kind of engagement, and providing teachers and parents and administrators with a picture of what it could be if you begin to loosen the reins in terms of, you know, network filtering, for example, and the way that technology can be used to engage students in their own passions and in their learning. But we can't do it if they don't. The only picture that an administrator or a parent has is their child sitting in front of the Xbox or playing Angry Birds. You know, we need to paint that picture for them so that they understand that. By opening up these technologies to our students, you know, the students are going to benefit, and that by doing it, are students going to make a mistake? Sure, just like students make mistakes, but the majority of our students are going to flourish using that technology for learning. So I think you have to paint a picture for people who are not familiar with the technology. Because if not, then they're going to be looking and hearing about things on Fox Network, like Dana was saying, all the terrible things that go on in the world, and focus on those things. And that's such a small fraction of what of the big picture.
You know, the longer I'm kind of in the biz, and the more I interact with people, last week I had a meeting with a college senior who was considering going to library school, and I have those types of interactions pretty frequently because I want to encourage great people to go into our profession. And so I started asking them, tell me what you know about Google. And the answer is not much. You know, what's Google in the business of? Well, information. I said, no, it's in the business of selling ads. So every time you enter a search term or every time you click on a link, you've given Google information that it then feeds back to you to create a worldview that is yours based on what you are likely to buy, right? Okay, so we know that. Do kids know that? No, they don't. And I almost think that the focus needs to be going forward, helping everyone be savvy information consumers. And what does that mean? That means you know how to be safe, you know how to look at the information and determine whether its provenance, you know if it's good or not, you know if it's reliable, you know, and if you know if it's something that you want to engage with. And it's kind of let the buyer beware. What you put out there, somebody has.
This is Paula. I think, Gina, you bring up a great point. That's probably, gosh, we could do a whole nother session on that because that is an excellent point. And I will just take a minute to say something that I have to say, I think librarians also need to make sure that they're opening up their worldview, because so often we are really worried about privacy, rightfully so, and exploitation of people, which is right and true, but it's not always in everything that any private company is doing. And sometimes librarians don't embrace new services. For example, many customers want to know what they have read over the last 17 years. They would love a record of that. I mean, they would love it. It's a service. But, you know, librarians don't want to accidentally have things available that might infringe on someone's privacy, which is a good and valid point. However, you know, we do need to make sure that we are looking at all of the options providing service, allowing people of all ages to opt in when they'd like to on a variety of enterprises, some of which may be commercial enterprises. And I think we need to make sure we remain relevant, and we need to make sure that we remain aware of the options. And if some of the evolving options may fly in the face of long-held librarian traditions, doesn't mean we should embrace them, but I do think we have to, as a profession, if we want to remain relevant with younger people whose lives are increasingly intertwined with a variety of corporations in a variety of ways, we need to make sure that we are open to any and all opportunities to engage with that world if it's appropriate.
Amen.
Exactly. So I'm kind of in the point where I could ask another question, or I think we should probably get in the wrap up. So what I'm going to do is ask a question and then have that be the wrap up. So, you know, we've touched on some really great examples. I still keep coming back to what Gina was saying about staying positive and having, you know, positive experiences and positive stuff to show to people. But in terms of like formulating final thoughts for this conversation, how can we, I actually think we started it here, but how can we shift the dialogue around youth access to social media from fear and anxiety to one of actually empowering youth? Easy question. And again, like we've go ahead, Gina.
I think that for all of us, the thing is, what do we care about? We care about helping kids grow into adults that have great lives, right? They're living and working and learning. That's who doesn't have a stake in that, you know? And so I think that the goals that we develop organizationally within our missions have to be focused on those impacts, so that then it doesn't become about the technology. it becomes about what are all the elements and all the tools that a child needs from their school library, from their classroom teacher, from their public librarian, working in partnership with parents and other people, other adults who care about these kids to make sure they've got what they need. And so from a public library perspective, we just started a new partnership with our newly consolidated Parks and Rec department. We took over the computer labs and community centers. And a lot of users of those computer labs are teens. And so we've decided on a community impact goal overall, that is, we're going to work together to help kids grow into responsible adults that understand, that have resources at their fingertips to help them achieve in school and ultimately grow into productive members of our society. I mean, that sounds like a pretty big goal, but think about that. Think about what that means. And so we become very focused on impact overall. That's the big picture. And then working back from that, okay, so these are the things we're going to do to help make that happen. Then you're no longer in a defensive mode of, well, why are you letting kids game? Because that's not even a relevant question. The question is, what are we doing for kids, and how does gaming fit into that to help them progress and move into their adult lives?
This is Paula, and I will briefly just say I think Gina's provided a great example, and to just kick it up a level, what I love about it is like seizing an opportunity, and that's all about empowerment. I love that you took over the computer labs at the Parks and Rec. That's fantastic. And now the library is into another space and doing all these things we're talking about, the education of parents that John's talking about. You're right there. That's fantastic. So I think that empowerment is about seizing opportunities wherever they come and making sure the library is there and available in a real community sense. So that's fantastic. It's a great example.
And I would say also that the example of empowering the students themselves, making some of this responsibility for defending, if we want to call it that, the use of social media dependent on our students, because we have some students that are doing some great things. There are examples all around us, around the world, of kids using social media effectively to affect positive change. Global school kids, the kids who went through the Google Science experiment. Darn well those students are not sitting there getting their information from an encyclopedia. They're using technology, they're using their connections. We need to share that. I shouldn't say they need to share that. We need to give them the opportunity to share that. So that would be my last 2 cents.
So I'm hearing stay positive, I'm hearing seize the opportunity, and share. I love all that. Dana, what final thoughts do you have for us?
I just wanted to agree with Gina's point that we're actually in this odd moment right now where we're so focused on the technology, but the technology is not the issue, and in a few years we're going to look back and go, why were we so focused on the technology? Because I think that what it really comes down to is that how do we empower young people, period, right? Technology, not technology, it's really about figuring out how to really engage with them. And I think that we hear a lot of different strategies. Some have been introduced in this conversation, some that are more broader conversations, and then we look at how technology gets woven into that. And so I think that one of the big challenges for all of us who are living and breathing this is to help make technology not the center of focus. Help push it away, recognize that technology makes certain things more visible, adds to different kinds of anxieties, but in many ways help people return to the focus on young people, on their learning, on their well-being, and I think that's where we actually see magical change happening.
Thank you all. I just want to say thanks to everybody here on this panel, but also thanks to everybody out there on the interwebs who is participating in this. We want to keep everybody, we want to encourage everybody to keep this conversation going by using the Twitter hashtag Future of Libraries, and to keep posting in the Connected Learning Google Plus community. By this afternoon, we should have a full recording of the webinar and some other cool curated content up on www.connectedlearning.tv that you could share with your networks. If you'd like to stay up to date on all the events and conversations happening throughout the month, please go to connectedlearning.tv and sign up for this month's newsletter. And finally, you should be all really excited because this coming Tuesday, May 28th, same bat time, same bat place. You can join us here on live stream from 10 to 11 Pacific as we wrap up this month on teens and the future of libraries. We'll be looking at insights and best practices that we've gathered over the past few weeks with Buffy Hamilton, Mimi Ito, and others, including yours truly. So thanks again, everyone, for your participation, and we hope to collaborate with you more throughout the month.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
It's great being with all